Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're signing in from. I saw at the very least from Alaska to Australia, so the sun almost doesn't set on the panel participants here today, which I appreciate. I'm joined today for a discussion on Canadian mineral exploration and why you might want to bet on it as an investor. I'm joined by Fletcher Morgan, CEO of TDG Gold, David Stein, CEO of Kuya Silver, and Mark Jarvis, CEO of Giga Metals. Gentlemen, how are you today?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. So here's how today's going to work for the folks in the room. It is an interactive event, so please use that chat button on the bottom right hand of your screen at any time during today's event. Questions that are on topic for today's discussion, I'll try to weave in as much as possible or ask them towards the end of the hour. If you do have questions about individual securities, you want to know if any of the speakers, what their drill program is like for the year, how much cash they have in the bank, etc., please feel free to ask them. We probably won't address them today, but I'll make sure the relevant teams get that information in the transcript so they'll be able to get back to you as soon as possible. I'll say that today's event is also being recorded. It will be available in your inbox later this afternoon, Eastern Time. At that point, you can share it. It'll also be available on events.six and our YouTube channel. But that's enough housekeeping. I want to get right into this conversation today, and I'll start with the kind of 101 of what we're talking about today. And Fletcher, I'll throw it to you first. In short, what key advantages do you think Canada offers for exploration? You can compare it to other jurisdictions globally if you'd like. But I want to hear about geology, infrastructure, political stability, and I'll shoot it to you first.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for inviting me on the panel today. So I do have some experience of being involved in exploration projects in Asia, Africa, and obviously now Canada and North America. And so I will draw a few comparisons, but I think the obvious place to start is how important the sector is to the Canadian economy. And it's not just a recent phenomenon, it's been for decades, over 100 years. And everything that we're seeing here in terms of where the sector stands today is a product of everything that's happened in the past. We are very, very well endowed in terms of our natural resource opportunities. We're very well structured in terms of the different parts of our sector and the integration of those. And when you compare it, and I don't really want to go into a jurisdiction that's not good versus a better jurisdiction where there are obviously things happening. But I think really where you can zero in is there are multiple things that you need, and Canada has them all. Now, that's not to say that we're doing everything perfectly. There's a lot of room for improvement. But if you, for example, take projects in Africa where there's a phenomenal geological prospectivity, in places where there has been, for whatever reason, an inability to get in there and explore, and where they've maybe just opened up in the last 15, 20 years, yeah, sure. Geological prospectivity, 100%. But then look at the other parts of the industry and this, political stability, infrastructure, road access, export licenses, all of those things that are incredibly important, and they're probably going to fall short. Now, it's not to say they can't get there, but the question that everybody should be asking is how long? And that's really what drove me into Canada and Canadian exploration. Was it's not just about the size of the prize. It's about how rapidly you can get to unlocking that prize. And when it comes to Canada and specifically British Columbia, where we operate, we not only saw a direct path to something of significance in terms of the size of the prize, but also the way to unlock it and to make sure that all stakeholders would benefit as part of that journey. And so, I think really where we are today is perfectly placed, given all of the things that are happening globally, and Canada's efforts over the last 10, 15 years to even put itself even further at the front of various initiatives. I think that's starting to pay off, and I think it will continue to pay off for at least the next decade, but there's more that we need to do.
I appreciate that. We will get on the more that we need to do for sure later in this hour. David, I'll throw it to you. I know you operate in multiple countries, but you've got a project in Ontario. Curious to hear your perspective on working in Canada.
Yeah, so important to preface our perspective as Kuya. We operate in in several jurisdictions, Peru, Canada, Ontario, and then also we are in a joint venture in Saudi Arabia. So we, besides my own personal experience, which is in investing in dozens of different jurisdictions. But Kuya specifically is we're not exclusively focused on Canada. So we do have more of a global perspective, I guess, on things. But with that being said, on a lot of factors, as Fletcher mentioned, Canada is just an absolute pleasure to do business in. I think when you look globally when you invest globally, one of the most important things is really rule of law, safety and security. And by rule of law, we mean that if you do have a problem, there is a legitimate process to go through. It's not going to take forever, and you don't have to bribe anyone. And that's definitely the case in Ontario and Canada. So those are really important. I think at the end of the day, the way I look at things is more like an investor. And when you're in the sort of the junior mining, even mid cap for that matter, the reality is the world is full of decent mining projects. Like they're literally in almost every country, every continent. And these countries are really competing for your capital. So you have to, you can look at that as an investor as, is this country giving me a good risk adjusted return on my investment? And I think in the case of Canada, it is. There's so many benefits from infrastructure, from the flow through share system, and just all the things I mentioned before about essentially the advantages of working in a first world country. Canada really ticks a lot of the boxes that we look for.
I appreciate that, David. And Mark, I know your operations in BC, but you've got a long career. Eager to hear your perspective.
Well, in terms of country risk, my basic rule as an investor, and I am an investor in all sorts of different mining stocks from majors to juniors. But my rule is I won't put my money in a country where I'm not comfortable to take my family. That's kind of the dividing line for me. And Canada is certainly a place I'm comfortable having my family. Part of the lure of Canada is, sheer geology. I mean, it's a huge country, and there is a lot of geology. I mean, even just looking at BC, there's all these different parts of the province that are, that are different, geneses, and we've got some young rocks out near the coast. You look at Ontario where there's like 3 billion-year-old rocks. I mean, everything's here. The other thing that Canada has, and that it's developed over time, is a network of geologists, metallurgists, and mining engineers. We've got a talent pool here that is second to none. I mean, you think Australia, perhaps South Africa. Quite a bit of talent ends up in London, I suppose. But this has been a mining jurisdiction for so long that, we've developed all of the skill sets and infrastructure, and, including the ability to raise capital. You've got knowledgeable capital markets that understand the mining business. It's a great jurisdiction. And of course, there's room for improvement. And I think some of the politicians are starting to accept that. Mining used to be, a 4-letter word. It was easy to find lots of people that were against mining. Now, the comprehension that, if you want an iPhone, if you want a car, if you want an electric vehicle, I mean, this is all metals. How are you going to get it? And would you rather get your metals from a jurisdiction that has a meaningful environmental assessment, or would you rather get it from the Wild West where, who knows what's happening to, local indigenous people, who knows what's happening to the environment? I mean, you can feel good about buying metals sourced in Canada. All in all, a great place.
I appreciate that, Mark. And I actually want to play off of that and talk about geopolitics really briefly in my next question. So we've done the basics, but I do want to get into the nitty-gritty a bit. Now, I know Giga obviously is a nickel project, and I'm curious, the global push for critical minerals and battery metals, it's suddenly in the news all the time. It must be to some degree reshaping exploration priorities in Canada. So I'm curious from your perspective, what opportunity does this create, the new reality for critical minerals for junior explorers?
Well, I think there's definitely, a political will in Canada to be developing the battery supply chain. Everyone sees that, batteries are the future for not just automobiles, but I mean, if you think about what's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years with, robotics, you need high energy density batteries. And so, there's a lot of will, and our new Prime Minister Mark Carney has talked about Canada as an energy superpower, and he's quite clear. He's not just talking about oil and gas, with which we're well endowed, but all of the copper, nickel, cobalt. We've got lots of rare earths actually in this country that could be developed, including in Saskatchewan, where you can readily dispose of radioactive waste, which is a consideration in developing a lot of different rare earth deposits. We got it all, and the politicians they seem eager to shorten the timelines to get environmental approval without sacrificing quality. It's just simply, you've got to put enough resources to the process to make it move along without a project rotting in someone's desk for years. And I think that realization is there. And there's also a move to help with infrastructure. And basically with the mining business, infrastructure means roads and power lines. I mean, there's other things too, but those are the two main things. So just politically, the wind seems to be in our sails.
Well, appreciate that, Mark. Fletcher, I'll throw it to you. I know, TDG's pretty massive land package does have significant copper, et cetera. So I'm curious what you're seeing in the future for critical minerals geopolitically and what it means for Canadian exploration in that vein.
Well, firstly, what I think it's done is it's put the mining and metal sector back onto everybody's radars, where we were potentially, as Mark said, we were thought of as a legacy industry that really wasn't, that was part of the past way of doing business and that needed to reinvent itself. And then critical minerals are a key to everything that's going to be happening in the low carbon economy and the digitized economies moving forwards. We get that. Okay, so that's really, for me, acted as a catalyst to get us back out there and showing actually that whatever you want to do globally now in terms of developing the global economy, the mining and metal sector is going to be absolutely integral to it. And I'd just like, yes, we have a lot of copper potential on our property package in the Toodoggone. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But just to stick on this specific point, I'd like to broaden the 34 critical minerals that the Canadian government has already identified. I'd like to broaden that. If there's one thing that we should have learned from the last 3 to 4 months of macro economic and global political instability, not least, some of the things we've seen that have been happening with tariffs, etc. If there's one message we've got to learn, is that everything that we've been doing with the mining and metals sector in terms of our approach to sustainability, in terms of our blend of the metals that we're producing, is now really important, not just for Canada's independence and strategic supply of metals, but also globally as well. And I'd like to see it broadened. Gold turns out to be now Canada's number 2 export. I think it's just hit that stat. Why is that not now being categorized? If there's one thing that can be helping us with our own economic future, it's a robust currency. It's a robust industry within Canada where we're using and taking advantage of more of the metal and mineral endowment that we're privileged to be able to work on.
Well, thanks for that, Fletcher. And David, I'll throw it to you. I know as a primarily silver company, and various jurisdictions consider silver a critical mineral now, or at least very least industrial metal. Curious, here's your perspective on how that impacts junior exploration here.
Well, we in our Ontario project, we do have cobalt as it's either a byproduct or a co-product, depending on, I guess, the price. And so it has been pretty interesting. We've seen quite a bit of support for the domestic cobalt sector in our specific little bubble of the Timiskaming area. The one of our neighbors, which is Electra Battery Metals, has gotten quite a bit of support from the Canadian and U.S. government, actually, to rebuild and essentially expand a historic refinery there that can produce cobalt for North America. And interestingly, they are, for the foreseeable future, they're actually importing the concentrate from Africa. Because there is no domestic source of cobalt concentrate at the moment. We may be able to help with that in the future. But anyway, so cobalt's been pretty interesting, and it's one of those metals that I think, along with lithium, is pretty much universally agreed that it's a strategic or a strategic metal. I have discussed with elected officials adding silver. It's I think 14 countries at the moment who do have 14 of the maybe 50 or 60 that have a critical minerals list have silver as a critical mineral or metal. And I think honestly it's kind of a no-brainer given its use in the solar panel industry, which again, if we want to diversify meaningfully our energy source in the future, globally, not maybe in Canada, but globally, silver plays a huge role in that, because you cannot make a solar panel without silver. So, and it's become the biggest industrial use of silver over the last couple of years. Although and then there's the monetary aspect as well. Fletcher mentioned gold potentially as a strategic metal, which Trump has actually brought up as well. And I think silver goes alongside of that. So, critical minerals are important, and also figuring out which ones are the critical ones is also important, because if the government's going to provide incentives for lithium and cobalt and stuff like that, they should probably, they definitely should for silver and gold as well. It's a huge benefit to our economy.
No, I'm with you there. My next question, honestly, the rock in the chat has a probably better formulation of it, but I really want to talk about investor interest in Canada. Because I know a lot of companies I work with, investors complain. What they'll often say is it's so much easier in Australia, is usually the company that they point to. But what Rock asked in the chat, and David, I'll start with you if you don't mind, is how does capital market investing in Canada compare to other jurisdictions? Do other jurisdictions have better access to capital?
Well, in my 25-year career now in capital markets, it has, the capital markets between the different markets kind of ebbs and flows. And so, I think we have been in a time where, Australia has been getting more interest in their metals and mining sector relative to Canada, but that easily could change. There's certain geographic and economic reasons why that may happen. I think in North America, in Canada, we rely heavily on U.S. investment to, kind of fuel the Canadian stock market. And there's been a lot of attention on non-mining, large cap tech, crypto, etc. And these things are typically cyclical, and when we do move to more of a value driven kind of market, I think mining will come back into favor. So we're maybe seeing that in the early stages, but not in any huge degree yet. I think some of the larger cap golds, for example, like Agnico Eagle, have done very, very well. in the market. So that's a good indication that big money is starting to move into the sector. And another year or two of that, and it'll filter down to basically everybody, including the micro caps. So that's kind of the way I see that. I wouldn't stress too much about one market versus another. I think you have to look at where your longer term, where your investors are going to be. And I don't see any fundamental issues with Canada, definitely. But Australia is great too. I have nothing bad to say about it.
Oh, great. Mark, I'm going to get you in here next. I'm curious just for your perspective on trends over the years. Do you think Canadian investor interest in mining is on the way up? It's on the way down? What trends are you noticing?
Well, I think it's on its way up from a low base. And if I can just get into the whole Canada versus Australia discussion, I think Australia is eating our lunch, frankly. Their junior sector is quite robust, and a lot of Australians I've talked to have said that they think it's because the pension funds in Australia have to invest Australian. And like Canada, mining is a very large part of the Australian, economy. So if you're going to invest in Australia, mining is going to be part of it. And that provides an underlying bid. In Canada, we've got flow through, but that's a very imperfect mechanism. Other than charity flow through, I really like charity flow through. But flow through in general is a very good way to destroy the market in your stock. It's sort of cheap money in a sense, but you pay the price for it with the aftermarket. I think one of the things that's changed and what will change again is there used to be in Canada an underpinning of a brokerage network that not only financed but also provided liquidity, open market buying and selling in junior stocks. Now in Canada, that's disappeared because basically, brokerage fees have dropped to zero for open market buying, so there's no incentive. So really, until you get through the $100 or $200 million market cap level, where the institutions can start, participating in the market, it's our problem is a lack of liquidity. And I don't know what the answer is. I just observed the changes over time. I think that'll change back again as the wider retail market gets into mining more. We're not really there yet. I'm starting to see things start, particularly in gold, where you may be getting some Bitcoin crossover, but really it's going to take that. I think it's going to take at least one big discovery that gets taken out for a couple of $2 billion, and then we'll have a market on our hands. But until then, again, I don't really know the solution, but things are picking up. But boy, if you look around Canada, projects themselves are cheap. That's why you've got a lot of Australian companies in Canada looking for projects, because they're not cheap in Australia. They are in Canada. Anyways, I'll leave it at that.
No, appreciate it, Mark. And Fletcher, I'll throw it to you. You think the Australians are eating our lunch?
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that Mark has said. I do think that we are seeing an increasing investor interest into Canadian exploration. I think it's mainly a function of metal prices that we've seen over the last couple of years. It was a driving force behind TDG getting an OTCQX listing so that we could appeal to a broader US-based audience, and we're starting to see that work. We got more work to do on our side, but I think just to sort of put a wrapper around what Mark and David said, we've got the system in Canada already in place in terms of where capital comes from and how capital flows into mineral exploration. I know that we're a world leader in exploration, but I also believe a significant of those amount of those dollars that come into our companies then go abroad. I think the system is there, but it isn't working properly, and it's mainly a function of the flow of funds and how much is coming into the system and where it's going to. And so I think we can help to get back and get it working. but it's going to take some effort from all parts of our industry, all in concert, in order to make it really start to function. I mean, let's not forget, the mining and metal sector is or mineral sector is 6% of Canadian GDP. It's incredibly important. It's on a proportionate basis in terms of the numbers of jobs we employ. These are some of the best paying jobs in Canada, relative to what we're producing. And so what we need to do is we need to lean into that. And maybe we'll get to talk about that in a minute. But really what I'd like to see is as a solution is something Mark alluded to. Australia has this mandate where a portion of the pension funds have to be invested domestically. I don't believe we have the same mandate in Canada at the moment. And I think that if you go and look, I heard a stat at the presentation, keynote speaker, I think, mentioned that only 1% of Canadian pension fund investment goes into domestic companies. For me, that's just not enough. And even though we're $4.2 billion a year is invested into exploration, again, it's not enough. And it's not enough given what we were talking about earlier in terms of how important this sector is going to be to the global economy and global stability moving forwards. And it doesn't just stop at actually the exploration. Another thing that Mark mentioned about the importance of the existing infrastructure, roads and power lines, etc. To add to that, it's ports and it's rail links. All of these things present us with an enormous opportunity in order to be able to access that endowment we've got. And I think once we get going and we start showing, and I agree, one major discovery would make a big difference. I think we kind of had one actually at the Aurora discovery by Freeport and AMOC on our boundary that was announced in January this year. It's super special. Okay, but I think we need multiple, and I think we have the ability in Canada to lead the way on that. And really what we've got to be doing is backing the entrepreneurs, backing those incredibly talented individuals that have grown up in this sector, and give them the shots in Canada itself.
Oh, definitely appreciate that. Oh, David, you're on mute if you're talking. Sorry.
Sorry, if I can just jump in before we move on, I just want to emphasize the pension point, because it is a really good point that Mark raised. We in Canada actually had a more domestic focused pension investment policy, and I remember when I was starting my RRSP, which is our personal retirement savings plan, that you had to invest a certain amount in Canadian stocks, essentially securities, and gradually over the decades that's been lifted. I guess in the interest of making, allowing us to invest more globally and in more competitive markets, et cetera. But, given the protectionism we're seeing globally, again, the trend is probably now that we should prioritize investing in Canada. And I think that is it's a great idea that probably needs some strength. Some more of a push. Definitely you do hear about it from time to time, but I hope that's something that we can build on in Canada, because it would make a big difference.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't know about the Australian legislation for pension funds. I imagine that is quite impactful. I do want to get into politics just to scare the crap out of your IR teams more than anything else. Just kidding. But I do want to talk about the most recent Canadian election. So obviously in a pretty surprise 30-day upset, Carney retained power as Prime Minister. And I'm curious, Mark, I'll start with you here. What, if any, shifts do you anticipate in Canada's approach to resource development? Because he's certainly saying some things that sound different to the previous government. Particularly curious if you want to speak to the balance between climate policy and mining sector growth.
Well, I'm hoping for a bit more, pragmatism. I'm not, in terms of politics, I don't really care what comes out of politicians' mouths. I look at the candidate and I go, is there any reason to believe that you can run a large organization effectively? And if the answer is no, I don't care whether it's left, right, or the center. If somebody's a bad manager, they shouldn't be prime minister. And because no matter what your goals are, you're just gonna screw up with poor management. I look at Carney and frankly, I see someone who we'll see. But he's run a couple of large organizations and quite effectively. So I'm hopeful that there's going to be a more pragmatic approach, less starry-eyed, if you will, and and that the work that was going on that I did like that the previous administration had, such as infrastructure funds for mining, I hope that will continue and improve, and that when there's talk of us being an energy superpower, that all of the elements that go into making that happen, including the investment, ecosystem, if you will, is considered.
Oh, thanks, Mark. David, I'll get you in here on this. What do you think, if anything, will change in the mining sector based on new Liberal government?
I think it's too early to tell for sure. But in my opinion, the initial signals have been positive. I think we've backtracked on some of the more kind of extreme policies of the previous government, and I agree with Mark. We just need to be pragmatic and common sense about, this is a strength of ours, and in this this new world, we need to flex it, right? And I think my feeling is that Carney gets it, but again, I think it's too early. We're only a few weeks into the new parliament, so we'll have to see what happens.
That's fair. Ink's not dry yet. Fletcher, I got double-barreled political questions for you, but I'll start with the one that the other gentleman just got.
I'm going to be controversial here. I can feel it coming. Look, I'm not just looking for pragmatism, and I'm not just hoping and feeling. I want this federal government to wake up, and I want them to really go onto the front foot here and lay down a very clear vision. I think we've been seeing more solutions, more vision on a provincial level. And I think it's time for the federal government now. They've got an incredible mandate and an opportunity to really take the Canadian economy forwards. And mining and metals is a key part of that. I think that we need to see the handcuffs coming off the sector. We need to come together, and we need to come up with solutions that provide a roadmap that we can all lock arms and work towards over the next, not just parliamentary term, but also heading towards 2050. I was at the Mining Association of BC keynote speech last week, and I think it was fabulous for highlighting all the problems. What it lacked, in my opinion, was the solutions and the vision. And I think we've got the industry to a point where we know how to work with each other. I think, know what the opportunities are. We know what we can contribute. And it's significant. A stat last week was something like 8% of British Columbians' mining and metal products go down to the US. So there's, believe it or not, there's a growth opportunity there. It might sound contrarian, but equally, it means that we're already delivering 92% of our products that go, overseas that don't go to the US. So we've got that opportunity to grow our global supply chains as well. This is the time. If not now, when? We should have learned some key lessons already. Is you can flick a switch in Washington, D.C. and switch off the film industry in Vancouver. And yet mining and metals, it's fundamental to everything we're doing and our way of life and the future of the life that we'd all like to live. And so now is the opportunity, and I'm sincerely hoping this federal government will come and listen to the forward-looking provinces who are and industry leaders who are basically saying, hey, we're ready to compete, we're ready to grow, we're ready to become the poster of how you go about building a sustainable sector that we're all proud of.
That's great. I got another question straight for you, Fletcher. Let's talk about the provinces for a second. So I know British Columbia is currently emphasizing First Nations partnerships and equity ownership in resource projects. Premier recently said none will be built without First Nations consent and financial benefits. So I'd love to hear, just get into the details. How is TDG Gold approaching Indigenous partnerships in the Toodoggone, and what impact does this have on timelines, strategies, et cetera?
It's been front and center of everything we've done since we first started, operating in the Tudagon district of north central British Columbia. And it was partly because of we inherited a legacy of smaller scale brownfield operations. And that was part of the attraction of the package in terms of the historical mining and exploration that had taken place there. But it was also something that we were, conscious of, that we would have to address out of the gate. It's also the right thing to do. So when we started acquiring properties up there in 2019, 2020, the DRIPA, D-R-I-P-A, I think came into effect in British Columbia in November of 2019. And that sets out the clear framework of how we have to work in partnership. I'm very privileged, and I know people who have followed the TDG story have heard me say it a number of times, and I'm very privileged to work with Christy Smith, our VP Sustainability. Christy is a published author on exactly how to work in partnership with local communities, First Nations in the natural resources sector. She's an MBA and is of First Nation heritage herself, and she's our guardian of the vision for doing this, how to go about it. And I'm really pleased to say that actually a lot of the things that Christy put in place out of the gate are now becoming what I see as standard operating procedures, standard approaches, certainly within British Columbia. And so I think, again, we've got enough vision, we've got enough talent within Canada that we can make this work. And I'll make a prediction. In the next 10 to 15 years, a lot of countries that maybe don't pay so much attention to this are going to have to evolve, and they're going to have to put this front and center as well if they wish to, pursue their own mineral projects. And so I think you're going to see a leveling up over the next 10 to 15 years, and British Columbia and Canada are at the forefront of everything, and I don't see us changing. And so when it comes to the specifics of ownership, there are various models that seem to have worked globally for these things. I don't think it has to be, ownership in the equity form. It can be ownership in other forms. I think that the local communities and businesses within whose traditional territories we're privileged to explore, I think they'll have a view on what will work for them. And the first stage of everything is this concept of active listening. And if we do that, I think, again, we'll probably learn more and learn how to come up with solutions that work for everyone.
If I can just jump in on that a little bit. Yeah, it's interesting, the link here. We brought in Christy to help us educate Mitsubishi Corp on First Nations issues in British Columbia. And she did a tremendous job, of course. The one thing I will say, and this is a conversation, we've had with provincial politicians, is, if First Nations are going to be involved in permitting, and frankly, I would like to see First Nations more hands-on with environmental assessment, be part of the process, not just the recipient of a report at the end of the day. It's going to take more capacity. And one of the problems that we run into is that if the provincial authorities are waiting for a First Nations response to a permitting application, and the First Nations are just overwhelmed with volume and a lack of personnel, then that's something that'll slow down the whole process. So, where does that capacity come from? I would argue it shouldn't be coming from industry, which is already, particularly the junior end of the market. It's a difficult market in general. But I think government, if they're going to, move in that direction, they have to provide the capacity so that things can move along, and that there is the capacity to actually evaluate a permitting application and all of that.
No, I think that's useful perspective. David, I want to get you in on Ontario, and I will say someone from the Ontario Ministry of Mines did sign up for this webinar, so mind your P's and Q's. I'm just kidding. But I did want to mention, so I know the historic cobalt camp in Ontario has produced over 500 million ounces of silver. I'm curious, obviously Ontario is we'll call it a mature mining district. It's got existing infrastructure, et cetera. How has that impacted your technical approach, your community engagement strategies, et cetera?
Well, it's a big question. I mean, just on the First Nations side, we consult and communicate with the First Nations that have traditional territories in our area where we're exploring. And what's kind of interesting about Ontario, as you mentioned, is we have some pretty mature mining areas, and we're very close to like the Timmins, Kirkland Lake area, even though we're not, we're further south, but still within that, that same sphere. And so some of the First Nations there are quite they're very, very sophisticated in terms of their structure and how they deal with the mining industry, and that is been that's been quite eye-opening for us since we went in there 4 years ago, and it's been a pleasant surprise to deal with these groups that are they're quite reasonable and and we don't need to educate them. In fact, they have more experience in mining than we do, so so it's been quite good in that front. And look, I think operating in a historic mining district has lots of different challenges and benefits. So the benefits are that there's already a lot of data. There's infrastructure, roads, et cetera. The challenges are, in the cobalt camp especially, it would be probably around dealing with old mine workings, which they're pretty numerous. We have less abandoned mine workings than some of our neighbors, but we do have them, and we have to make sure that they're safe, that people don't wander in, either accidentally or not or on purpose, and we have to also make sure that we're monitoring the environment as well. And that nothing from the last 120 years of mining is that we're doing anything to make it worse. So it's so there's definitely issues to watch, but on balance, it's a huge benefit to be in an area that has that mining history, because it just puts us probably years, if not decades ahead of developing something in a in a brand new area like the Ring of Fire. So which is great, looks great, lots of great geology and great discoveries there, but definitely infrastructure challenges that we don't have to worry about.
No, awesome. Appreciate that. I want to talk about provincial incentives. So I know Mark earlier talked about flow through and issues he's got with that particular incentive. I know Quebec, for example, has enormous exploration tax credits. You can claim back a lot of your exploration. I'm curious for your perspectives, and Fletcher, I'll start with you on what provinces are doing right and what they could do better in terms of incentivizing exploration.
Just one point on the traditional versus charity flow through. I do agree with Mark, but I think that in a market where there is liquidity and more investment from a wider pool of investors, the traditional flow through does work. I can see the benefits of it, but I do accept what Mark is saying. Just in terms of then the credits that we can claim back, it's all taking too long. To get that money back into Treasury can take somewhere between 24 and 36 months in some cases. It's too long in terms of the investment cycle and capital flows that we need to support our companies, and not just sustain them, but obviously move on to the front foot and keep growing and tackling more of the exploration opportunities that we've all got. I think that the credit, the tax incentive regime in Canada, I think it's well established, it's well understood, it works. I would like to see, as I've mentioned already, the critical mineral pool expanded to include gold, and I think David makes a great set of points related to silver as well. We were a beneficiary of that, and for those participants in this webinar that maybe not understand how important it is, it basically enables us to stretch dollars, certainly through the charity flow-through mechanism. And in the case of TDG, our raise that happened in February, the back-end price of that was printed at 50 pennies. Same for every investor that participated. But some of those dollars we were able to stretch by 1.65 times in order to be able to use those for exploration purposes, seeking critical mineral opportunities. And so, it's fabulous in terms of that. What I would like to see moving forwards is there's a gap now in investment that's really in terms of the corporates and the pull through, and them investing back into the sector in order to help generate future projects. In British Columbia specifically, for whatever reason, I'm sure it's multifactorial, we saw over a decade period a number of really important industry players exit the province. Now, it created an opportunity for entrepreneurs, including people such as myself, to step in and acquire projects that perhaps we wouldn't have been able to had those companies stuck around. But what we now need to do, and I think it's something between the corporates and the provinces as well to have a conversation, is how do we now start investing some of those incredible profits that they're seeing, that free cash flow, how do we get that coming back into our sector in meaningful ways at the junior end, so that we do have the dollars that we need in order to be able to advance the exploration on all fronts.
Oh, thanks, Fletcher. Mark, I'll throw it to you next as another guy working in BC. What do you think provinces are doing right? What are they doing wrong? What could they do better?
Well, I think right now they're listening, and that's a good thing. We've had quite a few meetings, including with the new Minister of Mines, Mr. Brar, and I think that they're getting the message that if they want to have a critical minerals industry be robust in British Columbia, that there's certain things they've got to do. They've got to improve the permitting processes. And they've got to provide some, support for First Nations to be involved in the process. But while we're on the topic, I'm just going to veer off a little. I want to take my hat off to Seabridge Gold, who took the CRA to court about Canadian exploration expenses. And this is a situation that's been going on for decades, and in fact that we have some experience with, where Canadian exploration expenses, which are suitable for flow through, but also suitable for refunds, partial refunds from the provincial governments, which was very helpful. The Canadian exploration expenses were defined as money spent to discover, delineate, and evaluate the quality of an ore body. And the part where you evaluate the quality, how do you do that? Metallurgy and engineering. You could have a remarkable deposit in terms of grade, but if you can't recover any of it, it's kind of useless quality, isn't it? The CRA had been holding back on and not paying in terms of metallurgy and engineering. And we ended up 15 years ago or so settling out of court with them on our dispute. But I'm just very happy that Seabridge actually took it to court, and that they won, because CRA was simply wrong in their interpretation and in their internal interpretation. So that's helpful, because BC, the money's significant. Also, Quebec is even better, I understand. So all of that helps. But again, I get back to, if the pension funds and, even the RRSPs, even if it was only a percentage that had to be invested in, Canada's not a bad place to invest. I wouldn't ever argue that you've got to invest all of your money here, because I think that would be absurd. You need to, if you're trying to retire, you need to be able to have the ability to invest wherever you think the returns are best. But Canada's pretty good. And I'm tending to invest right now in Canada more than ever, because I think our banking sector, for example, is more stable than it is in the US. It's less upside, perhaps, because they're stodgier, but they're also safer banks. That sort of thing. I think, if the politicians are listening, please consider that.
No, appreciate that, Mark. David, I'll get you on this one. What do you think provinces are doing right? What do you think they could do better?
Well, I can only really speak about Ontario. On the margin, it would be, the Ontario government has made a lot of announcements on, big investments in the sector. And it would, I think we want to see that, kind of structured and then executed on. And, I kind of like the way that Quebec does do it. Mark brought that up, where they've sort of got their own provincial funds, and you sort of know when this fund is investing, they're investing for infrastructure, they're investing in the mining industry or whatever. And I think that's sort of a good way to handle domestic investment, especially within the same province. At the stage we're at, we don't don't have a lot to say about permitting. Permitting exploration's been, for us, has been very, very straightforward, and again, compared to some of the other jurisdictions we operate in, it's a pleasure. But definitely some of that infrastructure, some of those mining investments that have been, announced or proposed, would benefit us a lot, and so we'd like to see more action on that.
Great, thanks. One thing I wanted to chat about that came up in the chat, came up over email, is Donald Trump. Going to spook your IR teams even more. But I know we've talked at various points during today's event about increased protectionism in the continent. And previously, we'd really thought about the critical mineral strategy as a continental endeavor. Do we think meaningfully this is going to change? And where do you think Canadian critical minerals, or just mineral explorers generally, will fit into the new continental regime? Fletcher, I'll start with you.
We've already touched on aspects of it, so I'll reiterate those. I think that we are well placed in Canada to contribute to the global critical mineral picture. We have to think about our own strategic supply for our own domestic purposes. These are not necessarily competing forces. I think we can have our cake and eat it. I think that the US is going to go through a set of changes now on an accelerated timeline, and every week is going to be different. But Canada does contribute already to the supply of these mining and these metals, and we can contribute more. We just have to lock arms, get ourselves into gear, and get going. I'd like to see us personally head towards a more open free trade regime across the board, because I believe in what we're doing. I believe in the way we're doing it, and I think we can knock the ball out of the park over the next sort of 10 to 15 years if we go about doing a few things properly right now. And so that's really what if any of the politicians are listening, it's not just about understanding the problems. It's now about actually putting in place meaningful solutions. And it would be naive, I think, to expect other countries around the world not to want to look at what Canada's been doing and adopt some more of those kind of aspects, foundational pillars of into their own sectors, and therefore expect to compete. And we're starting to see that already in terms of some of the trade negotiations that are already underway with Washington. So Canada's got to get moving. We've got to move on. We're ahead. We got to stay ahead now. And the question that keeps me up at night is how do we do that? And how do we attract enough investment and support to be able to do it? But I'm pumped, and I think this is a once in a generation opportunity. I don't fixate on what causes the perturbations that are being caused by what Donald Trump and his government decides from one week to another. It's not about that for me. It's about how do we win as a country, as a nation, as a sovereign nation, and as an economy. And I'm happy to try and play my part in it. But come on, Canada, it's go time.
Make me want to get a flag out. Jeez, appreciate that, Fletcher. Mark, I'll throw it to you for what you think comes next in the continent.
Well, first of all, here, Fletcher. In terms of the orange guy, I mean, this too shall pass, but not without leaving, some scars. And again, presenting an opportunity. If you're mining something critical that people need, you can sell it on the world market. You can put it, you can ship it anywhere in the world. Shipping costs are shorter to the US, there's that. But I mean, if they want to tax their people so that the people pay more for our materials, how about it? As long as we take the opportunity to diversify who we're selling to. And I think with metals, it's pretty easy. I mean, something like natural gas is a little tougher. You've actually got to liquefy it before you ship it. It's a lot of work. But, if you're producing copper or gold or nickel or rare earths or, anything really that you can mine, I mean, it's not hard to sell to the world. And so I don't think it presents that much of a challenge for our industry in particular.
Thanks, Mark. David, I'll let you get in that before we get into pitches for individual companies.
Yeah, I agree. I think the protectionism has some minor effects on the mining sector, but overall, most commodities are exported globally, so it doesn't have a big factor. There's going to be things here and there which do affect us. Like, for example, the $20 million investment in the Electra battery metals plant by the Department of Defense. That happened last year. That will not happen. That kind of thing is not going to happen in the next 4 years. That would be my bold prediction. But otherwise, I think there's a good opportunity for Canadian capital and Canadian talent to develop mineral projects in the U.S. because they do want to have their own supply of critical metals and gold. And, we have tremendous talent and expertise in that here, not that far away. And so, we don't have any projects in the U.S., but for those companies that do, I think this could be a really good 4 years for them.
Awesome. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate all of you guys. But one thing I want to do before we go to the at least 100 some odd people watching the event, I'd love to hear you pitch as shamelessly or as humbly as you'd like. Totally up to you. Just the company that you represent. Why might people want to get interested in the stock? David, I'll start off with you. Why should people think about Kuya right now?
Well, we're in three great mining-friendly jurisdictions: Peru, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. We talked obviously focused on Canada. We've made some tremendous discoveries there. Really unlocked a lot of value in this camp that I dare say was really written off as done. And we've gone in and reimagined the exploration model there. And not only that, we've actually proven success with several new discoveries in the cobalt camp with high-grade silver and cobalt mineralization. And over the last couple of years, we put together some meaningful drill programs that's starting to put together, I think, critical mass that could, end up being future resources. We also, though, our flagship asset is the Peruvian silver mine, Bethania. We just put it into production a few months ago, and we're ramping up production now. So we are one of the few silver producers in the world. We have a primary silver mine. We get 75-80% of our revenue from silver. And that is extremely rare. So for investors that want exposure to silver, there's probably only 5, 6, 7 companies in the entire world you can invest in, mining companies. And we're one of them. And, we're ramping up production and we're still valued like a junior. So there's a lot of upside if we get, sort of credit for being a mining company. And as we deliver more results and eventually profit, in the next few quarters, I think we will get there. So we will get that recognition in the market, and that could be a huge lift for our investors. And the biggest one is right here, me. So I'm very, very excited about that. And if anyone has any questions about Kuya, please we've got ways to contact us on our webpage and reach out.
Awesome. Fletcher, give it to them straight, as shameless or as shameful as you'd like.
So on January the 17th this year, our world changed. The reason it changed was a major discovery right on our boundary, with it drilled within 40 meters of our mineral claims by Freeport, McMoran, and AMark Resources, which is part of the Hunter Dickinson Group. Why is it so special? It's a gold-rich copper porphyry. It's shallow and it's thick. And I know various groups have started to calculate what they think might be there. It's truly significant. It's a paradigm shift for our district. It's also the most significant discovery in our district in the last 35 years. And arguably one of the most significant discoveries in Western Canada in the last 5 to 10 years. And it's right on our boundary. We are now the only independent company operating in the area. Let me explain that. We have Centerra to the south. That's, obviously, as people will know, an intermediate producer. They have now a strategic investment in our neighbor to the northwest. So there's Centerra, and then to our east, our entire eastern boundary now is dominated by Freeport McMoran. So we're the only independent. We were fortunate enough in February to attract investment from Skeena Gold and Silver. And if people don't know the Skeena story, they should look at that as well as TDG. They're known for their aggressive exploration, their creativity, and their agility. They are starting to work increasingly with us. And we move into this field season now well-funded to take finally the swings that we've always been talking about, which is to go and see if we have those extensions of that gold-rich copper porphyry coming onto our property, and if we do, how much? And again, this could be the beginning of a cluster of these opportunities, and if we're correct, then this could be the most significant discovery, certainly in our district or in the Golden Horseshoe, in the last 30 years. But it gets better, and the reason it gets better is that we already have downside protection built into our company by virtue of our existing 1.1 million ounce gold and silver resource, gold equivalent ounces. It's open pittable. It's one continuous deposit. And we're in a permitted mine area. So we already have a Mines Act permit in place. We also have a small scale tailings, and we're on mining leases. So we think that if we can continue to focus on the discovery potential, but at the same time find ways to keep moving forward our existing resource, we offer that perfect blend of hedged risk, but with extreme asymmetry. In other words, it won't take much to take us now from the 100 million market cap that we are right now with $15 million cash in treasury. It won't take us much to then move to the next level. And so it's the most exciting season. It all starts this month, and there will be continuous news flow. It starts with geophysics, which we expect to light up the districts. It's the first time we've been funded to do that specific form of geophysics. We're highly confident, given what we already know about the from the geophysics we've already done, and then it moves straight into drilling. And I'm super excited. Watch this space.
Awesome. Thank you, Fletcher. And Mark, cap us off today. Why should investors take a look at Giga? Oh, you're on mute, Mark.
I'm sorry. Well, we've got drilled off. We've got a giant low-grade nickel open pittable deposit that's incredibly simple to process and mine. And in fact, when you look at the mining and processing and even the financial models, it looks like a copper porphyry type of project. But again, the emphasis is simple. And we've got an excellent partner in Mitsubishi Corp. The other thing to consider is the price of nickel is way down right now. I mean, it's been a tough market for a couple of years now, and I don't trust my own ability to predict metals markets, so I'm not even going to try and do that. But they can change overnight, they can change slowly, but basically it's all about the cost of production at the end of the day. And so we've got that, but then rather than sort of wait for the price of nickel to improve, we got fresh eyes on our project. There's a very good geologist based out of Perth named Dr. Stephen Beresford. I don't know if you know him, but he's intimately involved with what I would call, like this Aurora discovery. I agree. It's a very, very interesting discovery. But the other one that's extremely interesting in Canada is Power Metallic. They're their discovery in Quebec is looking like the real thing. And I've had a lot of geologists look at it, and they agree there's a lot of room. Well, Stephen Beresford was instrumental in making that discovery. And he's a consultant. I reached him and said, would you be interested in looking at this deposit? We've only explored about, maybe 20% of this ultramafic intrusive, which all seems to be mineralized. So he came on board, and he's identified an extremely interesting target for us, what he's calling a Bulkovsky-style copper magnetite deposit, a massive deposit that he thinks is hiding in one particular area of the ultramafic. He says when you're looking at nickel environments, that it's actually easier for them to make copper deposits than it is to make nickel deposits, in his words. And so we're taking a hard look, and we're talking to a lot of people right now. I'd love to drill these targets. We're not currently funded to do that, but we're very actively looking for the money to drill this copper target, which is right next to, but not contiguous with us, right next to where our nickel deposit already is. So again, we've got our downside covered with a massive nickel deposit that's heavily levered to the price of nickel. But we've got exploration potential that I would love to chase.
Awesome. Mark, Fletcher, David, thank you so much for your time. Thanks everybody who joined. Really appreciate hanging out with us today. Hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon.